Welcome back, everybody, to the Birdies and Bourbon Show. This is going to be a fun one. We're going to get a little take us to school today. The whiskey professor, Bernie Lubbers. I mean, there's such a laundry list of things I could go through, Bernie, with the accolades and this pedigree that you're carrying around. World whiskey ambassador, author, bluegrass musician. I mean, I could keep going on and on and on, but people hear enough about me, buddy. How are you? And we're looking forward to this conversation.
Hey, I'm doing good. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me on. And anytime we can talk about bottle and bond, I'm on board. I'm just loving that the weather's breaking, that the sun's out, it's getting warmer. It looks like there's light at the end of the tunnel. So I think we're all going to get, I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, well, you are so I mentioned World Whiskey Ambassador. I think I got that right for Heaven Hill.
Yeah, I'm the global brand ambassador, whiskey ambassador for Heaven Hill. There's a couple more guys on my team, but I kind of lead the team, and it's a lot of fun. It's get to travel around the country and the world and talk about Heaven Hill whiskeys and talk about American whiskeys and we make every style of American whiskey. That's why I'm excited you wanted to talk about Mellow corn too.
Well, absolutely. And I'm a big fan and have been for years. I will, hopefully this isn't blasphemy, but my house blend. So I've got to get one of those, what you call it? What's the pour that you got over there?
The elliptical pour. You see those over in Europe a lot where they're hanging upside down. Yeah. And you just go up and kind of put your glass underneath there and get a pour.
So I'm going to have to invest in one of those for the bar. So for my house brand, I use Old Grandad 114 and Mellow corn 50-50 as a split. Kind of get a little, stiffen up the Mellow corn a little bit. But hey, man, it's all good on its own for sure. So
yeah, that's awesome.
So, I've listened to, I can't tell you how many podcasts. I hadn't had a chance to see you in person, but, maybe a couple of minutes for folks that, if you're not familiar with Bernie, I think it's funny as hell, the story of kind of you getting into, well, let me rephrase that. In your first career, it was kind of boring, but then, when you left that and then you kind of progressed through a job or two, if you take a minute to share with us.
Yeah, I started out after college. I worked at a bank here in town for about 2.5 years. And it's funny, I still play poker every month with the guys that still work there at the bank. They have a little more money tucked away than I do, but that's okay. I think I went on and a friend of mine put it best that I do play cards with. He said that and he retired from the bank with millions of dollars in stocks and all that kind of stuff from the bank. And he said, well, I think Bernie did it right. He retired at 25. Did stand-up comedy for 20 years, got into something he loved. And then from stand-up comedy, he now works in a business that, he doesn't feel like he works and he's kind of retired, but it's still working. So he says, I think he did it the right way. So yeah, I worked at a bank, and then for 20 years, I toured the country, telling jokes in comedy clubs and theaters and colleges around the country. And then, that's kind of how I got started in this, because I could stand up in front of people and talk. So, whether it's one person, 5 people, or 5,000 people, or 200 people, I could stand up in front of people and talk. And they kind of needed that. And at the time, the only ambassadors really for distilleries were the family members or the distillers themselves. And they started needing more help. So thank goodness, good timing stepped in and serendipity, or else I wouldn't have a job.
Nice.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's just a cool as hell story. I mean, you go from one being, I don't know how many people want to be a stand-up comic in their life or career, but it's definitely not an easy job. And if you've listened to some of the documentaries, et cetera, about some of the other folks that have kind of made it through their way and gone on to acting and such, and in a way, you've kind of done that, right? I mean, you're just you're telling a true story every time. Versus playing a fictional character. So I think that's a hell of a way to wind up and doing something that you want to do and you can have a good time at.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And, comedy was awesome. I started in 1985. So I was right there at the beginning of the comedy boom. And I started in bourbon right into 2005, right before the several years before the boom of bourbon. So I've kind of got good timing. It's been really a lot of fun. And it's and I still keep in touch with my comedy friends. And they're always asking me, you know, my life really hasn't changed much. I stay in nicer hotels now is all.
I'm gonna kind of push us into the bourbon scene, or the bourbon conversation a little heavier, but just to play on that. So when you were doing stand up, did you write all your own material, or was that all kind of life reflections, experiences, et cetera? And then I'll kind of push that into, because if you go to whiskeyprof.com, you've got some whiskey courses, and the whole demeanor, the whole premise, kind of as I take it, and your career or your passion or ambition towards the whiskey world has really been about educating people. And again, it's kind of real life, for, you know, things that happen that are real. So if you might take us back from those comedy days and then push us through to the bourbon experience.
Sure. Yeah. I talk about everyday life and just, you know, my experiences of my family. And the closing piece in my act was always about my father, who drank a quart of bourbon a day. And, you know, that's quite, and it was like a 10-15 minute piece, you know, and, you know, but I said, you know, they don't, and that's what he told the doctor. So, you know, then he always lying, you know, he drank more than that, right? I mean, if you're going to admit to a quart, you know it's more. And I said, he lived to be 94 because he was pickled. He wasn't going anywhere. You know, I said that cancer can't exist in a bourbon ridden environment, right? So you got to try that. So I just went on. And it was the end of my show. And it's a closing piece. And I would tell people in the crowd, hey, order a bourbon. We're going to do a toast to my dad, right? At the end. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, probably in comedy clubs, there was only Jim Beam, Wild Turkey, and Maker's Mark back then, you know, and there was some Jack Daniels and Crown Royal, but still, I didn't care what they ordered, as long as they ordered something and we toasted my dad. And so that's how it kind of got started. And a couple of guys over at Jim Beam, they heard that I was doing that. And here I'm talking to, you know, a couple thousand people a week. And hey, why don't you order Jim Beam from stage, you know? And I was like, well, I don't care what we order. That's great. You know, you know, it kind of got me introduced to him, and I was doing some, you know, emceeing and some fundraising efforts as a comedian with this group. And so I was kind of connected with a lot of the distilleries and that. And so, because they would have bourbon and do tastings, even though it was before the bourbon boom, you know, it's Kentucky. So it's always been a bourbon boom in Kentucky. It's that we've never not. So I guess how I got to be known by them. And then there was a job that came available in 2005, and it was just doing events and promotions in the state of Kentucky for Jim Beam. And so I interviewed for, they wanted me, but you still got to interview and get the job. Right. So I interviewed, right. I got the job. And then I started noticing, like, you know, hey, I want to do more than just, you know, this one run of events and promotions. Those jobs don't last but for 6 months or a year. It's whenever the budget runs out. So I was just thinking, you know, how can I capitalize on this, or you know, how can I exploit this industry and really kind of I've got my foot in the door. I got the faucet dripping. How do I get it flowing? You know, and how do I get my whole body in the door? Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know, so I always wrote my own presentations, as I did as a comedian. I did, and so I'm a writer. You know, that's where the book came from, and that, but. You know, so I started writing my own presentations, threw my own sense of humor in there, and it caught the attention of folks that were in the same company with Knob Creek and the Small Batch, and they noticed a little uptick about 2006, 2007 of sales, and so you know, that's when Woodford Reserve and Knob Creek were kind of leading the way for that, and then. Real good timing and serendipity came in. Fred Noe, who I was working with, Jim Beam's great-grandson, Booker Noe's son, and the great Fred Noe, one of my great mentors, his face went on the side of the Jim Beam bottle as the 7th generation distiller. And he was going to do a whole year promotional tour, you know, from Japan and China and Australia and all over Europe and the United States. So he was going to be busy with Jim Beam. So they needed somebody to talk about Knob Creek and the Small Batch. And so that's how myself and 2 other gentlemen got hired as the first ambassadors for whiskeys other than a family member, which I didn't think about till years later. I would have been scared shitless if I'd known that, if I'd have realized that. And then as the years went on, I wasn't looking for a job, but Heaven Hill was wanting to put together an ambassador program, and then they kind of lured me away from Jim Beam. And I love Jim Beam, but you know how companies get a little bigger, and sometimes things change. And the company had reorganized a couple of times, and I was doing a job I really didn't really particularly like. So I was vulnerable. And then that's when Heaven Hill kind of coerced me away, and it's been a lot of fun. So I've worked for the number one bourbon company in the world, and now the number 2 bourbon company in the world. It's and we're family owned, so it's really opposite. And it's been a really interesting. I still talk to Fred, and I still talk to Greg
Sure.
Davis, Denny Potter, everybody. So you know, it's a big family kind of, and so I always remind everybody that Jack Daniel's outsells the entire bourbon category combined. So,
Right.
you know, just one brand, you know, so we got to stick together. We got to do this. We can't do this alone. So it's also kind of easier to be friendly competitors when everybody's selling every drop they make. So thank goodness.
There you go. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's, you know, it's interesting. You bring that up and you kind of go, so we go from I'm going to steer us into the bottle and bond conversation, I guess, because that's, I mean, you carry it around with you everywhere you go, right?
Yeah, well,
the bottle and bond label.
It's right there. There's no brand on it, so you know, but still, it's bottle and bond.
Yeah,
for sure.
So at the time, so when you were at Jim Beam, did they have any bottle and bond product on the market?
Absolutely. That's what got me talking about it. Was my first favorite bourbon in general was Old Granddad Bottle and Bond. And I started drinking that when I was working up at with Drew Carey's old neighborhood up in Parma, Ohio, outside of Cleveland. And Old Granddad was pretty big up there. And this is in the 80s or not 80s and 90s. I mean, this is a long time ago. And I found that bourbon in it, and it just, you know, it has the word bonded around
Sure.
on the top of the label, and that just catch your attention. And I remember coming home and I said, "Hey, Dad, I found a bourbon that I really like." And he goes, "Yeah, what'd you find?" And I said, "Old Granddad Bottle and Bond." He goes, "Oh, Bottle and Bond, that's the good stuff, son." And I was like, "Whoa, what is that?" Now, when your dad, who drinks a quart a day, says that's the good stuff, you know. And I said, "Well, why don't you drink it?" He says, "Well, I like drinking this Heaven Hill 90 proof." He says that, you know, he's an all day drinker. He says that's a little too high proof for him. So, you know, he drank bourbon in a styrofoam cup, like a 24-ounce styrofoam cup. And with Diet Coke. And I said, "Hey, Dad, how come you use the styrofoam cup?" He says, "Well, son, I drink all day. I can't have the cup sweating on the table. Your mom would kill me, right?" So, you know, so kind of a good tip for those who, you know, if you're gonna have a Sunday fun day and drink all day, you got to have a styrofoam cup. So,
so personal question, you may not want to answer. How often did he recycle that cup? Or was there one cup that stayed in rotation for many, many days or even
No,
weeks?
I think by the end of the night it was pretty toast. I think it was right to trash can. So he had a sleeve of them, so it was okay. But you know, when your dad says things like that, you know, like you know, "Hey, that's the good stuff." You know, my dad also said, you know, I said, "Well, why don't you drink anything over 6 years old? Why don't you drink that?" I didn't say that. I said, "Why don't you drink this Knob Creek? It's 9 years old," or "Why don't you drink this Elijah Craig? It's 12 years old." And he said, "Well, son, I don't trust a bourbon over 6 years old." And that's something else that sticks in your mind when your father says, "Well," and I said, "Well, why is that?" And he says, "Well, if it's over 6 years old, trust me, that's just the shit they can't sell." And so, you know, so that is the mindset of a consumer back in the 90s and 2000s, is in anything over 6 years old is too old. And then what was taken off is Knob Creek and Elijah Craig and Woodford Reserve, and they were older and sometimes stronger. You know, Booker's was barrel proof, you know, things like that. So the consumers' taste buds and their needs and wants have changed over the years. And that's why most people who made older whiskeys, I'm going to grab this bottle here. Yep. You know, if bourbon sales are going way down, mm-hmm. So all your barrels in the warehouse are getting older, and you're selling less of it. So more of your bourbon's aging, but nobody wants it, right? Because my dad, it's a shit that can't sell, right?
Right.
So what do you think that bourbon companies did in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s to sell the whiskey that was too old?
it's marketing, right? You take the age statement off and put it in a fancy bottle. I don't know.
Well, there you got it. You got it half right there. You could take the age statement off. You could do that. But what they did is they put it into collectible decanters. Yeah? Mm-hmm. And they did age it. They did put the age on, but they put it in. This one says aged for 100 months because they know in Kentucky we can't do math. So, how old is that? I don't know. Is that 10 years old? Is that 8 years? Hell, I don't know. It's 100 months. That's not that old, right? So that's what they did with it. And they said, thought, well, hey, you might buy the nice decanter. And they had them in cars and planes and trains and telephone, all kinds of, collectible bottles. And that's exactly what they did. So, and most of the whiskey that was older went to Japan and went to China because they really do like old, they're big in cognac. Mm-hmm. And if we like a cognac that's 8 or 12 years old, they want a 40-year-old, they want the oldest, right? So, they just wanted that older whiskeys. And so now we've just kind of, our taste as consumers in the United States have kind of changed. And now we kind of like older whiskeys than stronger whiskeys. So, but it took 30, 40 years to create that. And so it's really kind of fun to have been part of that, being there right when all those small batch bourbons, which were only a handful, when I started in 2005, there was only 10 distilleries in Kentucky. And today there are 69. That's pretty crazy. That's a lot of growth. And there's 1,800 craft distillers around the country that did not exist in 2005. So that's exciting.
Yeah. So when you're talking about that, I don't know if we want to call it a paradigm shift. I mean, you could kind of go, history repeats itself, right? Because, the 50s, there was a kind of a whiskey boom and then we progressed and a couple of the spirits introduced and marketing, I think, probably drove that. Maybe not, but or maybe it was just the uniqueness of the product and it's new to that new.
Yeah. What happened around 1950, bourbon really was kind of in its, he had been out of business for 14 years from 1920 to 1934. Then Prohibition ends, but it still takes a couple of years to get these it wasn't like the distilleries are just ready to open. I mean, they were mothballed, they were destroyed. You took them apart. I mean, it was against the law to make whiskey. So you couldn't just lock the door. You had to destroy the stills. You had to do all this stuff. Only 5 distilleries were allowed to stay open to sell whiskey medicinally. So it really never caught back on. And when it in the late 30s, when we came out with the first whiskeys, they all wanted to be bottled and bond because that was the industry standard before Prohibition. And then that's the only whiskey you could get during Prohibition as medicinal whiskey was bottled and bond. So that's what people had in their mind as the industry standard and the goal to reach for, to achieve, to be taken seriously by a consumer. So that means we made our first barrel at Heaven Hill December 13th, 1935. That means we can't come out with our first whiskey until December 13th, 1939. And it was this whiskey right here. This is, we made this till just a few years ago. We never changed the label. This became Evan Williams Bottled and Bond. But this was Old Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. And gold was a really common color for labels back then for a good product, right? And so, when you look at Forrest Gump, this is what Lieutenant Dan's drinking in that movie. It's kind of fun and a lot of the themes. Pretty cool. So we didn't get back on the shelves until 1939, and then World War II came out. And in 1941, we were all given contracts to make high proof alcohol for the war effort. And you can make tires and rubbers and different synthetics and parachutes from high proof alcohol. I don't know the science. But there's a part of town in Louisville, which was really industrial area, and that's where they did that. And it was actually called Rubber Town. And there was pipelines from distilleries that went to Rubber Town to make this stuff. It's pretty cool history. You don't want to be around there right now. People, have feet growing out of their head and all that kind of stuff. But those lawsuits have been settled, I think. So, so we really never got back on the shelves. So that's 4 more years you're off the shelves after being gone for 14 and only back for 2. So you see how it was a hard start. Mm-hmm. And then, so what they did was, and this is from our owner, Max Shapira, and his dad, and Max has been with our company since 1971, so 50 years. And he was working with his father. So his father tells him the history of this. And it's a part of the history that nobody talks about that I've heard. So they after World War II, they didn't want to get caught in that conundrum again, and maybe have to make war for the war effort, because Korean War was looks like we were going to go to war with Korea. So they overproduced and they ramped up production so that they could make their whiskey or the whiskey they had to. And then technology changed and the government didn't come to them, and they had all this whiskey that they had made way too much of. And when you have way too much supply, the price, you have to cut your price. And then the Canadian whiskeys, the VO, Canadian Club, and then the American blended whiskeys, Seagram 7 and Kessler and all that, they were more of the fashion of the day because they could get Dewar's and Johnny Walker and all that kind of stuff. So blended whiskeys and that kind of thing were kind of a thing. And they were lighter in spirit. They were 80 proof. So the bottle and bond 100 proof was way too much for the consumer. Right. And so sales started going down. And then you saw, and then vodka and tequila come out in the 1960s. And just, that was the 1-2 punch that really kind of, as Max Shapiro says, almost sent us to the great liquor store in the sky.
Yeah. So sorry, but for people that may not be familiar with bottled and bond, you've made a couple of statements, right, that are significant, but you've talked a little about age, you've talked a little about proof points. You want to give us the Bernie Lubbers kind of breakdown of, why is bottled and bond? You talked about after Prohibition, this is kind of the staple and what we're making because it's what the consumers are looking for.
Sure. So let's go back in our Wayback Machine with Mr. Peabody and Sherman. We go back to the late 1800s, and there's no laws about bourbon, and there's no laws about whiskey or spirits. There's no laws that you can do anything. So if you wanted to make bourbon, and people were calling straight bourbon, nothing was added to it. It came straight from the barrel. Okay. So that was just kind of an accepted thing, that it was straight whiskey, or there was compound whiskey, or imitation whiskey. And that would be taking some Everclear, or, which is easy to make. You can use it make from 100% corn. You distill it to 190 proof. Remember your first high school party and that bottle of Everclear? That's neutral grain spirits.
Still do.
Yeah. And so what did you do at that party? How did you make that drinkable? Because that's not drinkable at 190 proof. What did you add to it?
Whatever is available. Now, I did grow up on a farm in East Tennessee, so we were cutting up a bunch of fruits and such, and chunking it in, and Hunch Punch 101. So you'd make up a hooch, and you put fruit juices in. Sometimes you cut up pieces of fruit and put it in there. It's all stuff people did with moonshine too. That's why you see some pieces of fruit actually in the jar with the moonshine. So they would take water and fruit juice and different things and water it down. Well, they could do the same thing and make imitation or compound whiskey by just adding like colors to it, and they would add sometimes like coffee to give it color, or they would take spittoons and empty the spittoons into it, for that little texture and flavor and all that. And sometimes they would take different like acids, like battery acid and things like that. And it really wasn't good, but they actually had actual recipes of how to make bourbon or rye from the same raw material, which was that neutral grain spirit. So it was basically bourbon flavored whiskey. So bourbon flavored vodka, basically, or rye flavored vodka. Mm-hmm. So that was what they called compound whiskey or imitation whiskey. Well, you can imagine the folks that made, good bourbon, they wanted to have something that set them apart from those pretenders. So they helped pass the Bottled and Bond Act, and that happened in 1897. So if you look at the top of one of our old Fitzgerald Bottled and Bond decanters, there's a gentleman's picture on there, and that's John Carlisle. And his picture appeared on the tax stamps, and it had to have a stamp that's showing that it's bottled and bond, and it was green. So, and it tells you all this information. So all of a sudden, it was the first consumer protection legislation in the history of the United States. You know how you get a Hot Pocket or something, and you look at it and it says, how many carbs are in there, how many sugars. Well, that was the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. 9 years before, we cared more about the quality of our whiskey. That's why I love Bottled and Bond too, right? And so priorities, at least they had them right.
Absolutely. So now when it said Bottled and Bond on it, that was a quality stamp. And there's been a couple different things added to it, but basically you were guaranteed a good age and strength and purity. So think about that in 1897 and 1901 and 1910 or 15. You're guaranteed that, by law, this has to be a minimum of 4 years old in the correct types of barrels. Yeah. So bourbon has to be aged in a brand new charred oak barrel. Mellow corn or corn whiskey has to be aged in a used charred barrel. Yeah. So, but 4 years it's got to spend in there. So you're guaranteed a good age. Mm-hmm. Then you could water anything down to anything back then. Doesn't have to be 80 proof. It could have been 60 or 70. You don't know. So then you were guaranteed this was exactly 100 proof every time with bottled and bond. And that's why that J.W. Dant mellow corn and on that green part on that neck of mellow corn says 100, because that's got to be. So now I'm guaranteed a good strength. So that's 2 good guarantees. And then by law, you can't add caramel color or tobacco spit or battery acid, right? Or fruit juice. You can only add pure water. So think about 1897, 1901. You're guaranteed purity, age, and strength. That's pretty damn cool. And then you have to put the actual producer, the actual distillery has to be listed on bottled and bond. And they have a distillery number, which is called a DSP, Distilled Spirits Plant. So here it says distilled by Heaven Hill, and you got to put your real name of the distillery on it. So that, so I know exactly who made it. You can also, we own Old Fitzgerald brand name and Elijah Craig. So if that becomes confusing, it says distilled by Heaven Hill, DSP KY1. So that code, you can Google it. It says that's Heaven Hill. So now I know exactly who made it. And then if it's bottled by a separate plant, because our distillery's in downtown Louisville, but our bottling plant's in Bardstown, it says bottled by DSP KY31. It is just so transparent. And it's all on the label, and you can read it, and it says, it has all these laws that bottled and bond meets all that criteria. There's a few other things like it has to be from one distilling season and from one distillery. So if we have more than one distillery, we can't mingle them together and call it bottled and bond. There's two distilling seasons in distilling, one's spring and one's fall. So they're listed on these tax stamps that if it's made in the spring of 2011 and then bottled in the fall of 2021, you have to put that, you have to put that on there. So there's no guessing about bottle and bond. You know exactly who made it. You know the minimum, it's 4 years old. And then if it has an age statement on it, it has to be all that age, like Henry McKenna's 10 year. But that J.W. Dant, that Miller Corner, are all aged for 4 years. Nothing but pure water has been added to it. And it's a guaranteed good strength of 100 proof.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned the one season, or one distillate season, and that's what's going into the bottled and bond bottle. And I don't know why, but I was just thinking as you were talking, and I don't know why you would do this. Maybe for folks that are mass producing thousands of barrels a day. But would I ever have? So you can't put anything else into the bottled and bond bottle. But would I ever be using what's in a barrel and putting it in another bottle that's not bottled and bond, or am I?
Sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. I mean, we don't put a brand on any of our barrels. We put a recipe. And that recipe, like J.W. Dant shares a recipe with Evan Williams and Elijah Craig and Henry McKenna and Fighting Cock. So, but we can only use barrels from one distilling season for a specific bottled and bond brand. So that's why sometimes J.W. Dant, even though it's 4 years old and 100 proof, just like JTS Brown and Evan Williams bottle and bond, they taste a little different because we're picking barrels from different areas of rick houses and a different 6 month period. But like Knob Creek is 100 proof and 9 years old, and from one distillery, but they're a million case brand, so they have to kind of mingle their seasons together because it's a huge brand.
Sure.
Bottle and bond, and they want to grow that brand. It's not, and it probably meets all the criteria, but that's how restricted bottle and bond is because and they want to grow that brand. I don't blame them for not making it bottle and bond. But they have Old Tub, which they came out with, and Old Granddad Bottle and Bond, which they do. So that's how restricted it is. I would say that, words on labels are like men and women in the military earning medals. You got to earn the whiskey medal. You got to earn, that's from grains. That's not from molasses or sugar or fruits. That's from grains. Bourbon is a specific, at least 51% of corn to be that. So in a brand new charred barrel. So you have to earn the bourbon medal, and you put it on your chest with pride, right? Straight means it's been aged for 2 years. So that's a medal that you earn. And in Kentucky, that's a great medal. That's, we know what we're doing here in Kentucky. Plus we have extreme cold winters and extreme hot summers. We get good aging. Do you want Florida straight bourbon whiskey or Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey? Do you want North Dakota straight bourbon whiskey or do you want Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey? They both make good whiskey. It's just different whiskey. It's not Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey, right? So that's a good medal. But if it has bottled and bond on it, it has to be, from one distilling season, from one distiller, nothing but pure water added to get to down to 100 proof, aged for a minimum of 4 years in the appropriate wooden containers. And then you have to put the real name of the distillery on and the DSP. You hear all that? So I call bottled and bond the Green Beret or Navy SEAL of spirits. It's got all the medals. So why wouldn't you want every single one? And that's why I'm so passionate about bottled and bond. When I was a kid, right down the street from where I live was an old theater. It's now a Qdoba, but it was a theater, and I saw the John Wayne movie, Green Beret. It's one of the first movies I ever saw in a movie theater, right? And it's just you always remember that. And I remember Sergeant Barry Sadler sang the title song, and he was actually a Green Beret and Master Sergeant. And the song goes, put silver wings on my son's chest, make him one of America's best. 100 men will test today, but only 3 will be Green Beret. So there's 1,800 craft distillers. There's 10 major distillers making dozens of labels. Let's say every distillery makes 2. Well, that's over 3,000 labels of American whiskey. There are about 40 bottled and bonds. And of those 40, wow, Heaven Hill produces 10. It's crazy. But, we're family owned, so we're going to do things that other people don't do. So
that's very cool.
Yeah. So in thinking and Old Tub, Old Tub's not bottled and bond, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it is.
Sure,
okay.
It is.
Yeah, I didn't pull it down. I've got it on the shelf. So I'm going to reference that, and then I want to reference the new bottle that came out. I don't know, was it last year? I guess the Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. So kind of rebranding, got the Rick House and such on there. And you look at some of these. You look at some of these, some of the other labels that you guys have. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, but talk about the JT Brown, the JW Dant, Mellow Corn, etc.
Yeah. And there's Old Tub. I knew I had it. So I got a whole bottled and bond section on my bar here. So I encourage everyone. If you have your bar, your bunker, have a section that's all bottled and bond. I mean, it's really cool.
So what's your thoughts on like the rebranding or I guess it's rebranding. It's almost re-imaging, but with Old Tub, Heaven Hill.
Yeah. It's actually, it's a part of it, but some people is premiumizing a brand, because for many years, many decades, we've been giving away bourbon for no money. I mean, and it costs a lot of money to make bourbon. I mean, the next time people get, we got a lot of grief. We had a 6-year-old bottle and bond that was only in Kentucky, and we just didn't want to kill the brand. And it was bottle and bond. It's 6 years old, and it was like $13, $15 a bottle. And then people say, "Oh my God, you put it in here. You only added one more year. Now it's $40." Well, look at all that money we lost over those years. And other distillers can't even get a bottle and bond because they don't have enough whiskey, much less a 6 or 7 year old.
Wow.
Think about, all the bourbons that are out there and how much they cost. I mean, no one bitches or complains about a $30 bottle of Grey Goose. They didn't age that 1 minute, right? Exactly. I mean, I just go nuts thinking about stuff like this. It's crazy. How much is a bottle of Patron? It's $40 and it has never been aged. The Blanco, great products and they're worth it, right? I mean, it's great. So, but think about, we had to make this and wait 7 years or 6 years. So because bourbon was depressed for decades and our Heaven Hill brands were around, Well, you just can't start adding $5, $10, $15 for a bottle. You got to do it gradually,
sure.
Or you have to rebrand it or reposition it, right? And people do it all the time. I mean, I'm pretty sure Ford looks at Chevy and kind of says, well, we need a car that's about the same price to compete with that, because consumers are buying that, right?
Yep.
And every industry does that. Well, just because we have a lot of whiskey, but we still need to do that. I remind people that we are in the bourbon business, not the bourbon charity. There's a lot of, look at the Stitzel Weller where Pappy Van Winkle worked, right? That, they stuck to their guns. They only made Old Fitzgerald that was bottled in bond. So that brand was always bottled in bond. If they had never had a variant, then they also made Weller and Cabin Still and Rebel Yell, things like that. But that was their flagship brand, right? And so they're out of business. Right? The holy grail of distilleries that people talk about and look back upon as, oh my God, it's the holy grail. They're gone, right?
Yeah,
they're gone. So you have to do things to compete. And when you look at things, and we're not the only ones to ever rebrand. And someone's told me, oh, but it's the same whiskey with the same name, right? I mean, you just took a 6-year-old, slapped 7 years on it, and this one's 15 and this one's 40. Well, you guys, what are you doing? Well, it's happened many, many, many times, right? So you have this Old Taylor, which was 6 years old.
Yep.
And this was $15 a bottle. And then you put it into this and it's 45.
Yeah. We're not maybe if you can find it.
Yeah.
Right.
And the single barrel happens to be 75.
Right.
And neither one of them have an age statement on it. Right. And this one does. Right? And it's 7 years and it's 40. So we're still $5 to $35 under this, right? And these are great products and these are totally worth it. But we deserve our time, right? We're like the Goonies. This is our time. This is our time down here. Right? And if the whole bourbon world is starting to premiumize our products and making money, can't we too? We can't make good whiskey if we don't exist. So, right. I understand people's frustration, but you got to understand we have frustration too. And you just can't go around selling 6 and 7 year old whiskeys for $10 anymore. It's just a different world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, nor should you, right? I mean, it's that's part of the legacy in the business and being able to continue to provide what you're providing, right? I mean,
right.
It's cost of living goes up every year.
Absolutely. And we had to pay, people don't even blink and they'll buy a can of Starbucks, a can right. for $4, right?
Yeah.
But they didn't pay alcohol. They didn't pay $13.20 a proof gallon for that either. And here we do, and here we are, and you get a hell of a lot more than four drinks out of this, right? 3 drinks. Of this. So for, you get 25 pours out of this. So 25 times $4, this is cheaper than Starbucks, for God's sakes.
Yeah. So when do these start? So I've got in front of me the J.W. Dant Mellow Corn, and I'm going to hold up a bottle, which is not bottled in bond, but which is a great bottle that you guys produce, the Evan Williams single barrel. I think that's
absolutely
a wonderful daily drinker. So, and
under $30.
Well, but my point was, I can get these 2 bottles for the price of that 1 bottle. And I would say, each on their own, they're unique and different, but equally as good. So, in looking at what you did with Heaven Hill, and which I thought was absolutely fantastic, it made me want to buy more of it. I mean, it was that, the eye candy, the appeal, right? I mean, the kind of thing that's out there. So, when did these start to get a makeover in that fashion, or do they ever? And is there always going to be that kind of nostalgic vintage, let's keep it as it is because of what it is?
Well, we don't have a lot of plans to premiumize mellow corn. Mellow corn's kind of going to be mellow corn. Now we do have some corn whiskey that has become older, So we do have an opportunity to come out with another brand of aged corn whiskey that, and we own many dozens and dozens of brands we're not even using right now. So we have a label room of labels we own. So we'll probably come out and have a premium corn whiskey one day, but there's not a big market for corn whiskey. It's pretty much us and Balcones and Platte Valley and, a couple others. And you can't build a category with 3 or 4. So I always encourage, if any distiller is listening, come out with an aged corn whiskey. We got to build this category, right? Because it's fun to build a little category. But mellow corn, and you see both of those in front of you, Max and his father bought those brands. And it's one way how we built Heaven Hill was, if you're going to come out with another brand, you've got to have enough capacity on your still to be able to make and fill those barrels to age it for 4 years or more and come out with it. Or you can buy an existing brand and you get all the barrels that they have in inventory. So you don't have to build on and expand your distillery for at least 4 years or when the stocks of that run out. Well, what a great way to build a business. And they happen to be it's a conservative family owned company. So they also own department stores. This was their side hustle, right? So in the 1960s, they still had the department stores. That's what they made the money. So this was still something they were investing in. And they wanted it to become what it is today, which is really cool that it is. But they had the financial wherewithal when the other distillers were going out of business that they bought those brands. And some of them are only popular in North Carolina or, Ohio or, South Carolina or, Pennsylvania or America. So, but they didn't care. A bottle makes X amount of dollars and it adds to the bottom line. So they bought these little regional brands like these J.W. Dant, JTS Brown, Mellow Corn, Rittenhouse Rye, Pikesville Rye. And that's how they built the company right now. And that's why we never change. Don't screw it up. Remember, Bill Samuel says that all the time. Just don't screw it up. Right. So if you, and they all share the same bottle. So this is a proprietary bottle. To cast this bottle costs tens of thousands of dollars, right? Mm-hmm. It's a mold that you own. You have to buy. Well, hell, we own that tall. That's called a tall round. Yeah. So that's a tall round, and this is called a tall square. Yeah. Yep. So anything goes in that. So you keep the cost of production because we have to pay taxes on all this. It costs a lot of money for grains. We spend $68 million a year in wood with a barrel before we make the first drop. Okay? There's a lot of money invested in bourbon. So one way to keep your costs down on a brand is just don't screw it up. Don't change it. Here it is. And that's the same label for both of those. Mellow Corn, you look at the front at the very bottom underneath. It says 1945, I think.
Yep, 1945, copyright, registered patent. Yep.
Yeah, we've never changed it. And J.W. Dant, we've never changed that label. So just don't change it. Don't screw it up. It's not the same label since 1835, but still, I got you. That if you look, I have bottles from a picture of a bottle from 1940s. It looks just like that. So it's kind of cool to have those.
Brand recognition, right?
Yeah. And they're not in every market. I think they're only in a handful Mellow Corn is nationwide, but J.W. Dant is probably only a handful of markets. It's not nationwide.
Yeah, I'm in Atlanta. I can find it pretty regularly in Atlanta.
Yes.
The one I can't find down here though is the JTS Brown. Hell, is that Kentucky only?
No, but it's Kentucky, Indiana, and a couple more markets. I'm not really sure what markets they are. But it's cool. It's a cool old label too. Yeah. And we haven't changed that label. That's amazing. That is Heath and JTS Brown and Creole Brown on the front there. Those are the 3 gentlemen's names on there. Kind of neat.
Yeah. So you're traveling. I don't know. You've got a statement you make. 200,000 miles a year. You're traveling around.
Not that much. Sometimes about 100,000 miles a year. Flying around. But I'll go to Europe every once in a while. I haven't been anywhere since March 13th of 2020.
Yeah, that's cabin fever, hey.
Yeah.
I don't know. You may be kind of over it by now. It's like, well, all right, creature of your environment. But when you're introducing Bottled and Bond to folks, and do you find it more often than not? So if you got 10 people in a room is it 10 people that want to learn more about it, or is it 10 people that I don't know what this is, and I want to know what it is?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I don't just talk about Bottle and Bond. I talk about, our other products too. And I talk about bourbon whiskey and rye whiskey in general. But, I hope that sometimes, you never know what people hear and what they take away. But Bottle and Bond just has all the sexy old historical stories, and has so much to talk about, and as bourbon does too. But just because something isn't Bottle and Bond, like you had that single barrel, that vintage single barrel, that's a phenomenal bourbon, and it's 86.6 proof. It's just, but it has a flavor profile that's just amazing. But, you just want people to glom on to something that you say and get excited about it. If I'm talking to bartenders, I'm really going to talk about Bottle and Bond a lot because, they like Bottle and Bond 100 proof because if they're making a cocktail with several ingredients, the cocktail stands up. The base spirit of bourbon or rye or corn whiskey stands up in that cocktail because it's not just 80 proof or 90 proof, it's 100. So that's why bartenders like it. So if I'm, it depends on the crowd I'm in front of, if it's consumers or whatever, I try to hope they get excited about Bottle and Bond or any of our products. But
nice.
Well, you've definitely got a hell of a portfolio, and I don't know that there's anything that I wouldn't pour myself and share. So
absolutely. I'm going to pour some of this JW Dant right now. I've been watching yours.
I did too. Yeah. So, I will say one of my favorites, and I don't want to use the word budget. I'm going to use the word great value. How about that? One of the great value bourbons or whiskeys that you have that I'm just a huge fan of is Fighting Cock. And, that one is, man, that's a showstopper for me every single time. I love that stuff. Can't get enough of it.
That's awesome. That's an old brand that we had purchased. We didn't come up with this. Some people said, you came out with that to go up against Wild Turkey. No, we didn't. That brand was around. They both have, they both have birds on the front of them. And ironically, they were both made, both of their distilleries were in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. So they were even closer before we bought it. But, it's just 103 proof, and those 101 like Wild Turkey, 103, 107 like the old Wellers and all them. Those were the barrel proofs of the time.
Yeah.
Bourbon was put into the barrel. You couldn't put it in at more than 110. Now you can do it at 125. But back then the law was 110, and most people were right under it at 107. So what they did is that's about as strong as you could get, because the lower parts of the floors of the aging of the warehouses, the proof goes down, and the higher parts it goes up. So getting it to 101, 103, or 107 were the barrel proofs of the time, and that's where those. I don't know why there wasn't any even numbers, but that's maybe they just marketing decided that or something. Who knows?
So you make so if you looking on your website, or if you go to whiskeyprof.com, you got a pretty interesting I don't know if analogy. You've got an interesting dissection of a whiskey menu, and more often than not, maybe not the past year, but prior to the past year, it wouldn't be uncommon, and you open up kind of I don't think I can say whiskey. You open up a whiskey catalog, right? It's like, well, what do you have? And it's like, here you go. And you're fumbling through pages. So it's, it's more like a wine catalog than it is, a bourbon catalog. So you want to share a little bit about how does someone that's maybe new, maybe I've got a few bottles at the house or I've tried something before. How do I'm going to go and sit down and kind of flip through this whiskey bourbon catalog and pick out what I want at a restaurant. How do I do that?
So you're talking about if you get a menu of a bunch of bourbons that are available or American whiskeys, how do you go about choosing one?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, whether you're doing that or you're going to start your collection at home, as I said before, I encourage everyone to go out and buy. I would be looking at the bottle and bonds, right? You're guaranteed. They're the Navy SEAL and Green Berets. You can't go wrong. It's a quality stamp that most distilleries can't even achieve, right? So that's a pretty cool thing. You can't go wrong with a bottle and bond, whether it's ours or anybody's. It doesn't matter. It's going to have great quality. You may or may not like it. that doesn't mean it doesn't have good quality. You might not just be, but I guarantee you're going to pretty much like 9 to 10 out of 10. But one good way to do it, though, if you're intimidated, you can't go wrong with a bottle and bond. You just can't, you just, as I said. And if you're going to purchase whiskey, I challenge people all the time. You take $100 into a liquor store and I'll take $100 into a liquor store. And my cart is going to be a lot fuller than yours is. And I'm going to have a lot different array of whiskeys, right? You're maybe going to have 1, 2, or 3 bottles. I might have 5 or 6 or 7, because I know that Mellow Corn, which is $13, I know that's a Navy SEAL or a Green Beret. So sure. I'm probably going to have it in there, right? So I can get 4 or 5. I can get 4 or 5 of our bottle of bonds, and we're not even at $70 yet, or $80, and I got $20 left over. Right? Pretty crazy. So I tell everyone, start your collections at home, or if you're looking at that menu, go bottle and bond. Then you can start going off. Oh, I like this. I like that. Let's say you like our Rittenhouse rye. So you go, oh, I like rye whiskeys. Well, now you can go off on a rye whiskey tangent, whether it's our products or somebody else's, or you might want to try Pikesville, which is one of ours, or you might want to try Old Overholt, or you might want to try Sazerac. You can go off on a tangent then. You might want to try Old Forester rye, something like that. So you can find what you like at the start, which I think, it's easy to start with bottle and bonds. There's, like I said, 3,000, 4,000 labels of American whiskey. There's only 40 bottle and bonds. And in any one given market, there's probably only about 15 or 16. So you can go to a liquor store and buy 16 bottles. That's a good start of a collection. And then you can start tasting them. And then you can go off on a tangent and build your bar after that. Right? That's how I describe people to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great counsel there for sure. That's, I would say I may have done that. I may have actually built my bar after you, believe it or not.
Wow. That's awesome. No one ever listens to me. That's great.
I didn't say it was good advice. Let's see. What are we missing on? I know we can't. You got things, better things to do than chat and drink with us.
No worries. I will encourage y'all. I appreciate y'all talking about my website. I've had that. It was just something I thought I'd host and do, and it's just kind of fun for me. And it's not branded, so I can talk about everything. But I do that every day, and even in my tastings, we're all. I wouldn't say one big family, but we all know that the rising tide raises all ships. But I will tell you, if you go to heavenhilldistillery.com, there's some really cool stuff there. We've got a podcast called Tales from the Hill that we do just kind of internally there. It's just on the website. We're not trying to compete with podcasts, but we have access to us all the time. So those are pre-recorded and they're kind of fun. But you can watch a rick house being built over time-lapse photography, which is really interesting to watch because they're so fascinating, the amount of lumber that's in there and things like that. We go into great detail of our mash bills and the percentages of grain that's in all of them. We go into a lot of great, there's so much we're learning about maturation. Andrew Webrink over at the Independent Stave Company was somebody you should have on. He's just amazing. We're learning things that we didn't even know a year ago. They're the ones really at Independent Stave. They're the ones really looking at the research and data and science. And we're learning. We used to all think, and I was always told for years, the reason we either use the deeper chars, like a number 3 or a number 4 char, the alligator chars.
Right.
Because if you'd use number 1 or number 2 char, you'd have to age it longer to get the same result. And that was kind of the accepted non-scientific, but that's just what people said. Well, we're learning that's not true. You can use a number 1 or number 2 char and get as deep a color even after a short period of time. It just brings a different flavor profile. So now that's opened up. We can put the same recipe into 4 different char levels of barrels and have much more different whiskey. This is all new in the last year or two. Oh, wow. Pretty crazy. So it's pretty neat.
Well, people that are making it, I mean, back in, you started off with, we're back in the, 1850s, right? Mid 1800s. And I don't know that if whiskey was looked at as a scientific thing, right? If it was a scientific.
Well, Dr. James Crowe was the first one to look at it as a scientific thing. And he started making whiskey in 1836. Okay. So you're talking about the right point of history. You're correct. He started using saccharometers to measure the amount of sugar, and he also used hydrometers to be more precise on the proofs that you would distill to. He would also use the sour mash method, and that really helped with the consistent flavor, but the pH levels in the cook and in the fermenter. So he was the first real scientist.
Yeah, and what you're talking about now with the maturation, the aging process and how things are moving, has it taken maybe a break in tradition to get to the point to where we're looking at it to that degree, or we're just, hey, we're kind of there now, we're going to start looking at it like that, or like we need to just look at it differently? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, sure. You've got several things going on. You've also have many generations of distillers that had one way and only one way, but you're not broke, right? New generation of distillers they're open to science, and not that they weren't. Every distiller is a scientist,
right?
But it's just that, as I said, this data is brand new.
Yeah.
So if you were told by your daddy, who is a distiller, and his grandfather's a distiller, we only use a number 3 char. Well, that's what you do, right? You don't even think about it. You
don't screw it up. Yeah, don't screw it up.
But if your buddies over here at Independence Dave or McGinnis or whoever says, no, wait a minute, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
And that's why they have barrel symposiums, and they share information of the industry. So this is all brand new information. It's just going to be interesting to see who uses it.
Yeah.
Because some people won't.
Right.
And that's fine, because they have one thing they want to do. We're family owned. We can kind of do a lot of things, but we also were a large producer. Our master distiller, Conor O'Driscoll, he says, well, I can't experiment too much. My beaker is 124,000 gallons.
Right.
That's how big our fermenters are. So
sure.
we can't, we can only do so many things, right?
Right. Yeah. All right. So so we're visiting Bardstown. And and I'm not sure. So let's think about, we've got some things open, and I think there are some things back open there now.
Yeah. Most people are giving tours we have 8 people on a tour now instead of 20.
Right. So what's a must visit? Obviously Heaven Hill, but what's if you want to throw out a couple other must visits, and then what's some diamonds in the rough as far as where do we eat, or what's a must see that may be off the radar?
Yeah, well, I put on my website, there's it's kind of clunky to go through. I got to change it, but I don't make any money on it. I don't, and I got to pay for everything myself. So it's one day I'm just gonna have to sit together and do the articles a little bit better. But if you can cycle through it, you go to Whiskey Courses. If you go to Whiskey Courses 101, start going down, it tells you where to go eat, drink, and be merry in Nashville, where to go eat, drink, and be merry in Chicago, where to go eat, drink, and merry in Louisville and Lexington and Bardstown. It's in there, but so people either come to Kentucky and they either stay in, depending on, because they're right. There's some that are right next to each other, a mile or two, but there's others that are 40 miles away. Right. So you got to plan your trip really good. Okay? There's some great tour companies. There's Mint Julep tours, and there's Kentucky Bourbon tours. There's a lot of you might want to enlist their help, because then if you're going to taste at these, you might want to be driving everywhere. But, you can do it and have a designated driver, all that kind of stuff. But in Bardstown, there's Barton, there's Willett, and there's Heaven Hill. And then there's Bardstown Bourbon Company, and they're great. And they've got a restaurant called the Bottle and Bond Kitchen, which is a wonderful restaurant. There's also the Rick House restaurant in the basement of the Oscar Getz Museum. And that's something you should see, is the Oscar Getz Museum. I still think there's no entry fee, and it's kind of self-guided, but it's got a lot of cool things. It only takes about, half an hour to go through it if you just kind of want to go through it on your own. Really neat. And then, then you can go out to the Maker's Mark and the Independence Dave Company, which is out in Lebanon. And that's where Limestone Branch, where Steve Beam and my buddy Steve Fonte are at. And they make Yellowstone bourbon out there. things like that. And then, then you started going over to Lexington area and Frankfurt, and that's where Buffalo Trace and Wild Turkey and Four Roses are out that way. But, you're either going to stay in Louisville, Lexington, or Bardstown, and depending on where you go. But don't forget about Northern Kentucky, up across from Cincinnati. There's a couple of great distilleries up there. New Riff Distillery is up there and across in Newport and Bellevue, Kentucky. Yeah. And they're making a lot. Is that a bottle and bond? They make a lot of good bottle and bond.
Yeah.
And boy, I tell you, their whiskey scene on the main Strasse there in Covington. There's Bourbon House. It's a very German area, so H-O-U-S, Bourbon House. And then you've got the Old Kentucky Bourbon Bar and Wise Guys Lounge, which is also in Lexington. And Goodfellas Pizza, but it's a pizza joint, but it's got a speakeasy above it in there. And then you've got you've got some other great ones in Lexington. You got Bourbon on Rye and the Bluegrass Tavern. But just go to my website, and I've been trying to be good. I still don't know. I haven't been to these places, and I do get the word of places that close or places that open. But it's pretty up to date. But just use Google after you see it. But you're going to have to come back to Kentucky 10 to 20 times to really kind of see everything. You'll want to go back again. We're just finishing an $18 million renovation in Bardstown at our visitor center. And we've got a big, beautiful glass rick house that two-sided, that's the corner of it's glass. It just looks great. And everybody else has been making improvements to their visitor centers and upgrading. So you'll want to see it. It's phenomenal.
Very cool.
Yeah, I did get a chance to swing by there. It was well before. It's probably in late 2019. It was a stop in for me, just kind of stop and take a peek, and I had to get out of there. But yeah, it was. I couldn't miss it. I was close enough to drive by and take a look at the new stuff. So Dan had a question for you though that we can't. Oh yeah, you did.
Which one was it?
Well, is bottled in bond
the brisket of the bourbon world. But he says the Green Beret. He already kind of answered it. So yeah.
Oh well, that's a good way to put it. I'd say that's correct. And also bottle and bond, just like brisket. A lot of places only have so much per day, and they run out, right?
Exactly.
We only have so much from one distilling season. We hope we don't run out, but sometimes it is that restricted. So I'd say that's a good description too.
Oh, cool. Let me ask you, I actually have two questions for you real quick. Which country, since you got started and with the big boom of bourbon and everything, which country surprised you the most in terms of their adoption to bourbon and their consumption? And number two, who was your comedy idol?
Oh, well, I have several comedy idols. Paula Poundstone was always one of my great comedy idols because she was a conversational, and the way she works, I don't work a crowd is part of my thing. I could. Mm-hmm. But, she was a master of it and great. And there was another great comedian, Brett Leake, who is one of my very, very, very favorites. Brett is just an unbelievable writer. Jeff Caldwell is another great. These are names people really don't know. But, I got to work with Drew Carey and Steve Harvey. That was we called it kind of our high school class, so they were in my high school class, kind of a thing. We would see them all the time. John Fox was a great, just a road comic, and just a great guy to do that. But that's hold on. What was the other question? I forget.
Which country surprised you the most in terms of their adoption? Yeah.
That would be, for me, that would be Poland and Slovakia and Czech Republic and Croatia. Some of those Eastern Bloc countries that are now not communist anymore, and they're kind of open, and they love American whiskey, and they love one of the best Manhattans I ever had was in Poznan, Poland, at a great little whiskey bar called Whiskey 88. And they called Whiskey 88 because it had a piano in it too. So 88 keys, Whiskey 88. And great single malt selection too, but they love American whiskey. And I gave a talk there one night, and I've been there a couple times now, and they're just so awesome, and they're just so happy. They have such a great sense of humor. Even the younger people can remember when it was communist, and that. So they all have this mentality they could go back to being communist tomorrow. So we're going to live today and have a great time. So it's really cool. And I love that mentality. But I asked the bartender, he goes, what can I make you? And I said, use one of our products at Heaven Hill and make me your favorite thing. And he immediately grabbed the Mellow corn bottle. Oh, wow. And I'm like, you know, I didn't know if they brought it. I thought they might have just brought it in, you know, for that tasting, for that night, you know, whatever. And he made a perfect Manhattan, you know, with sweet and dry vermouth. And it was wonderful. And I'm like, how the hell do you know? He goes, I love Mellow corn. I love it. You know, so I was like, this is awesome. You know, so those kind of countries, and Slovakia really surprised me. And we had a weekend off. People in Europe don't work like we do. They actually take weekends off. So it's cool because I get the weekend off. But the guy was our salesperson over there. His father-in-law plays bass in a bluegrass band. Mm-hmm. So there was a bluegrass festival up in Trenčín and Teplice area up in the mountains. And so we went to it. And so here we are eating goulash at a bluegrass festival. And I had a flask of whiskey and everything. So that's, you know, bluegrassers all over the world. But, you know, they all love whiskey. So we were playing, and they heard a guy from Kentucky who played a little bluegrass was there. And that's, so pressure's on. I'm from Kentucky. I'm representing bourbon and bluegrass music. And that was one of my best memories of all. And it was up in the mountains, and I looked down. I mean, this looks just like Eastern Kentucky. Wow. I mean, it really just so beautiful. It just was incredible. So that was fun.
That's really cool. That's really cool.
So what instrument did they hand you?
Well, I'm a guitar player, so
okay.
So I got to play a couple of their guitars, and they were like, "What kind of picks are you using? What kind of picks?" And so now the internet, you know, makes the world a lot smaller. But they were just, you know, they were trying to, you know, just find everything. It was so funny, you know. They would sing like "Blue Moon of Kentucky," but in Slovakian. So, you know, I'd like, you know, but you know, you can play with them because you know the music, right? But you know. And then when it was just, I thought Bill Monroe, so this was like the 27th year of this bluegrass festival. Wow. It wasn't just like they just had it. And I'm like, Bill Monroe would probably cry if he came and said, here in 2019, there's a 29th year of a bluegrass festival in Slovakia. I'm like, wow, how cool is that?
Well, he's probably crying because it's one that he's never been to.
Right?
How the hell did I miss that?
You think, you know, one guy started a genre of music that goes all over the world like that. It's pretty neat.
Very cool.
Yeah, really awesome. Bernie, it's been a pleasure, buddy. We'd like to get you back on again sometime and kind of dig a little deeper and have some more chats. And we'll beef up our bottle and bond collection. I've got a pretty good one, but you know.
Here's kind of something you want to look at. And they got this in Georgia. This is the only bottle and bond California grape brandy in the world. This is one of my I'm proud to say, one of my brainchilds. So I never thought when I graduated University of Kentucky with a 2.6 cumulative that I would launch a national brandy brand, but there it is. Kind of cool.
Awesome. And it's in Georgia, you say?
It should be, yes. I'm pretty sure it's in Georgia. Yeah,
I'll have to take a look.
It might not be in every liquor store. You might have to ask them to order it, but that's how you do it.
It's easy enough. I know the deal.
Yeah, we'll do
there you go. Tell them Bernie said you should get it.
There you go.
Absolutely, my friend. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show with us. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for educating us and our listeners, bud. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
We'll look forward to seeing you again.
Remember, you got to stay bonded, right? And stay on it, man. So I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much.
All right.
Cheers.
Thanks, Bernie. Cheers.
All right. Hold on, Bernie.
Hey, would you mind dropping us a bumper? Hey, this is Bernie Lubbers, and you can call yourself a whiskey professor or Heaven Hill, whatever you want. That makes no difference. So, but Birdies and Bourbon, yeah.
Hey, this is Bernie Lubbers, the whiskey professor at Heaven Hill Distillery, and you're listening to Birdies and Bourbon.
The professional right there.
Awesome, bud. You dropped a few of those, man.
Bernie, that's what they call me.
Yeah. Hey, we really appreciate it. No kidding. We'd love to get you back on, and if there's, I don't know, we'll come up with a maybe like a blind tasting or something. Would you be into that?
Yeah, here's something that's kind of cool. I do a tasting that's called the Evolution of Bourbon, and so I take people through a tasting from unaged corn whiskey, which is our Georgia Moon. Not that we're pushing that brand, but it just shows what people were making in late 1700s. It wasn't bourbon. It wasn't even aged. It was unaged corn whiskey. And then it moves to pointing in the direction as we learn how to barrel work. So we taste mellow corn. Then we taste Larceny to show how wheat came into the equation and why there's only 5 or 6 wheat bourbons on the market today, and how that came to be. And then we go through the Bottle and Bond Act and drink a Bottle and Bond, and then we at the end we drink a Elijah Craig to show how the small batch and single barrel bourbon. So it's a whole evolution of and it shows you get to see, hear, smell, and taste the history of how bourbon became bourbon and taste through it. It's pretty neat. So that's just, but I'll talk about anything.
If you'd be open to doing that with us, we'd love to get a date on the calendar with you, man. So
and when I do that, I actually play a couple songs from the history and the time period of it. So
you got to sing it. You got to sing it in Slovakian though.
That's right. So when we talk about mellow corn and making corn whiskey, there's a song from the early 1800s. So the same exact time period. Wow. And it's called Copper Kettle, about making corn whiskey and all that. So it's just kind of a way to bring it alive and make it a little more.
Well, let's connect on a good date for us, because I got a feeling. I mean, we could have kept going, I'm sure, for a long time, and I'm not complaining about that. But that's probably going to be, let's make sure we've got time, and we can sit down and not have to rush through. But we would love to.
Yeah, I can do that tasting in 30 to 45 minutes, and it's not rushed.
We don't need to rush it. Yeah, man. So Bernie, thanks, man. We'll let's connect. I'll send you a note back, and when this drops, we'll keep you posted. We'll tag all your stuff, and you'll have plenty of plugs and all that good stuff. So not that you need them, but yeah.
Hey, man, it all helps, man.
It all does, bud. All right, cheers, Bernie.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, cheers.